Welcome to the Mike White Podcast, where I, Mike White, share my conversations and book reviews through my journey to learn all that goes on in this amazing world. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
All right, today on the Mike White Podcast, I'll be reviewing the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. The book was released in 1997 with Sharon Lechter as a co-author. She is a CPA and helped Kiyosaki put all his notes together over the years regarding financial education into a single book form. And since ChatGPT exists and is in the world today, I'm going to use it. Here's what ChatGPT gave me when I asked about the purpose of the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The purpose of the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki is to provide readers with financial education and guidance on how to build wealth and achieve financial independence. The book tells the story of Kiyosaki's childhood where he had two father figures, his biological father, Poor Dad, and his best friend's father, Rich Dad. Kiyosaki uses the contrasting financial philosophies and behaviors of these two fathers to illustrate key concepts and principles of personal finance and investing. The book emphasizes the importance of financial literacy, such as understanding the difference between assets and liabilities, building passive income streams, and taking calculated risk in investing. It also encourages readers to challenge the traditional idea of working hard for money and instead to work hard to create assets that generate income. Overall, the book aims to inspire readers to take control of their financial futures and make smart choices that will lead to financial freedom and prosperity. Once again, ChatGPT amazes me. This is spot on. Now that you guys have a good, broad overview of the book, I'll break it down chapter by chapter. The introduction is written by Sharon Lechter, a CPA. She talks about how there is a need for more financial education in the world. The advice parents always gave of study hard and get good grades so you can get a high-paying job with great benefits may not be the best for kids these days in a rapidly changing world. She talks about playing Kiyosaki's cash flow game and realizing the benefits of having assets that provide income and not just defaulting to the rat race of constantly working more and more to buy nice things and experiences. A quote that stood out to me was, "Maybe telling our children to strive to be good employees while also striving to own their own investment corporation is not such a bad idea." Now to Chapter 1, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Chapter 1 gives insight into Kiyosaki's childhood. He had two father figures, his biological father, or Poor Dad, and his best friend, Mike's father, Rich Dad. Kiyosaki uses the contrasting financial philosophies and behaviors of these two fathers to illustrate key concepts and principles of personal finance and investing. His rich dad was highly educated. He had degrees from Stanford, University of Chicago, and Northwestern. His poor dad never finished the 8th grade. Both were hardworking and earned substantial financial incomes, yet one struggled financially all his life. Robert's poor dad would often say, "I can't afford it," while his rich dad would say, "How can I afford it?" Another difference in the way the two fathers thought is regarding a personal residence. Robert's poor dad saw his home as a strong asset, while his rich dad saw it as a liability. One of his fathers believed in a company or government taking care of you and your needs. There's a quote, "The idea of job protection for life and job benefits seem more important at times than the job." Quote, "The other believed in total financial self-reliance. He spoke out against entitlement mentality and how it was creating weak and financially needy people." End quote. And then another quote, "Although both men had tremendous respect for education and learning, they disagreed in what they thought was important to learn. One wanted me to study hard, earn a degree, and get a good job to work for money. He wanted me to study to become a professional, an attorney or an accountant, or go to business school for my MBA. The other encouraged me to study to be rich, to understand how money works, and to learn how to have it work for me. I don't work for money," were words he would repeat over and over. "Money works for me." End quote. My reaction to this chapter is that I love the theme of ownership and responsibility. I think the victim mentality, the thought that people owe you things based on need, is a terrible and immoral way to go through life. However, I think there's also some value in his poor dad's advice of perfecting craft. A craft or profession you love can lead to much happiness in life. This craft may not always be of value, though, and your profession may quickly turn into a hobby. A new technology may come along, which will make your profession obsolete. No profession is truly safe, and people need to be willing to adapt. That is why having financial education of his rich dad is so important. Each person will have their own approach, but refusing to learn about investing in assets is like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. It's a powerful tool that can create time for people to live the life that they want to live. All right, so now for chapter 2. So this is lesson 1, the rich don't work for money. Kiyosaki describes a time in his childhood when he became jealous of other kids in his school because they were taking trips and doing things that his own family could not afford. Robert was about 9 years old. He wanted to do things the rich kids did. He wanted to learn how to be rich. He and his friend Mike decided to collect lead toothpaste tubes and melt them into counterfeit nickels. They showed Kiyosaki's dad the business, and they were devastated to learn that what they were doing was illegal. Robert's poor dad was proud of their hard work and recommended they go talk to Mike's dad if they wanted to learn how to make money. Mike was surprised to learn his dad was considered wealthy because they didn't live in a fancy house or have a nice car. After talking to Mike's dad about wanting to learn how to make money, Mike's dad, the rich dad, hired them to work at his convenience store every Saturday for 3 hours. Robert and Mike consistently showed up every Saturday to dust off cans, but Robert started to become frustrated. He accepted the job because he wanted to learn, but all he ever did was dust cans. He became frustrated with his rich dad and thought he was being exploited for child labor. By the end of the first week, he was fed up and ready to quit. He told Mike. Mike then told him that rich dad knew that this day would come and that he wanted to speak with Robert. And here's a quote from the talk rich dad had with Robert. "You boys are the first people that have ever asked me to teach them how to make money. I have more than 150 employees, and not one of them has asked me what I know about money. They ask me for a job and a paycheck, but never to teach them about money. So most will spend the best years of their lives working for money, not really understanding what it is they are working for." He also says, quote, "Stop blaming me, thinking I'm the problem. If you think I'm the problem, then you have to change me. If you realize that you are the problem, then you can change yourself, learn something, and grow wiser." End quote. My big takeaway from this part of the book is that Rich Dad purposely made the kids do a menial task to show them the importance of initiative and self-responsibility. No one is there to hold your hand and lead the way. It takes thought, questions, work, and actions to get where you want to go. Rich Dad highlights how fear can be a crippling emotion that keeps people working for money rather than having money work for them. Quote, "Some people say I exploit people because I don't pay as much as the sugar plantation or the government. I say people exploit themselves. It's their fear, not mine." End quote. To me, this highlights the importance of free trade. While we have never had a true free market in America, it is relatively free, and of course, we got rid of slavery. People are free to choose to trade with one another. An employee-employer relationship is win-win. If the employee is not happy with the terms, they do not have to agree to work for the employer, just as the employer does not have to hire the employee that demands terms that they are not happy with. After the meeting with Rich Dad, the boys actually lost their salary. They started working for free. 3 weeks goes by before Rich Dad gives them a new offer. He describes the role of a typical employee and says, "If that excites you kids, I'll start giving you 25 cents an hour." The kids rejected the offer. They didn't want to be the typical employee. They wanted to be rich. But Rich Dad upped the offer to $1 an hour, and then 2, and then 5. This was a massive amount of money for the kids those days. But they continued to reject it because they wanted more than the typical employee lifestyle. Here is Rich Dad's response to the kids rejecting the raise. Quote, "Good," Rich Dad said softly. "Most people have a price, and they have a price because of human emotions named fear and greed. First, the fear of being without money motivates us to work hard. And then once we get that paycheck, greed or desire starts us thinking about all the wonderful things money can buy. The pattern is then set." End quote. Rich Dad starts to explain the rat race to the kids. Quote, So people also work for money because of desire. They desire money for the joy they think it can buy. But the joy that money brings is often short-lived, and they soon need more money for more joy. More pleasure, more comfort, more security. So they keep working, thinking money will soothe their souls that are troubled by fear and desire. But money cannot do that. End quote. He then says, I'm not interested in just teaching you to make a pile of money. That won't handle the fear or desire. If you don't first handle fear and desire, and you get rich, you'll only be a high-paid slave. This resonates with me big time. The benefit of money is it makes certain things in life easier, but it does not bring happiness. Rich Dad also comments on the macro environment of the day and talks to the kids about how the whole system may soon be changing if the government decides to leave the gold standard. Quote, when that happens, boys, all hell is going to break loose. The poor, the middle class, and the ignorant will have their lives ruined simply because they will continue to believe that money is real and that the company they work for or the government will look after them. End quote. He knew that rising inflation would go hand in hand with leaving the gold standard, and based on the last 50 years, he was spot on. Finally, the chapter ends with the kids' first business success story. They found a way to get comic books that were going to be thrown out and created their own library in a spare room of Mike's house. They hired Mike's sister to be the librarian and had their first successful business. They were off to the races. Chapter 3, Lesson number 2. Why teach financial literacy? Quote, money without financial intelligence is money soon gone. He talks about how it is not how much money you make, but rather how much money you keep. Kiyosaki stresses how important it is to build a strong base of financial literacy. Rule number 1 is know the difference between an asset and a liability and buy assets. His simple definition for assets is that, quote, assets put money in your pocket, end quote. He highlights how financial skills are not taught in schools and that more money seldom solves someone's money problems. Intelligence solves problems. This chapter also highlights the fact that a personal residence is a liability, not an asset. The goal is to have assets pay for expenses, not a monthly income. A big reason for this is because spending tends to scale with income for the financially illiterate. This perpetuates the rat race. The more you make, the more you spend. He defines wealth in this chapter as a person's ability to survive so many days forward. It's a measure of cash flow from the asset column compared with what's moving out from the expense column. Chapter 4, Lesson number 3, mind your own business. This chapter highlights the importance of acquiring assets. He refers to the McDonald's founder Ray Kroc's speech to the 1974 UT Austin MBA class. Kroc asked them, "What business am I in?" And all the students answered that he's in the hamburger business. He corrected them in saying that he's in the real estate business. McDonald's was the largest single owner of real estate at the time of writing. He uses this example to highlight the difference between profession and business. Ray Kroc and McDonald's may have a profession of hamburger sales, but their business is the accumulation of income-producing real estate. Kiyosaki goes on to list what he considers to be real assets. Number 1, businesses that do not require my presence. Number 2, stocks. Number 3, bonds. 4, mutual funds. 5, income-generating real estate. 6, notes or IOUs. 7, royalties from intellectual property. 8, anything that has value, produces income, or appreciates and has a ready market. He stresses the importance of acquiring assets you love. If you don't love it, you won't take care of it. While Robert loves acquiring assets, he also enjoys luxuries. Here's a good quote that gives an overview of how he views spending on luxuries. As your cash flow grows, you can buy some luxuries. An important distinction is that rich people buy luxuries last, while the poor and middle class tend to buy luxuries first. Chapter 5, Lesson Number 4, The History of Taxes and the Power of Corporation. Kiyosaki highlights the importance of minimizing tax burden in order to grow your business. He tells the story of Robin Hood and how his rich dad saw Robin Hood as a crook. I agree with this in principle, but not 100%. Robin Hood is not a good example because society in Robin Hood, that story, is not a free market. The wealthy were crooks. You can see this today in areas ridden by gangs or even in developed countries such as Russia. When the system is rigged and the government violates rights, I can get behind a Robin Hood. He explains how the government funding system creates perverse incentives. Quote, the government policy, if you were a government bureaucrat, was to avoid having excess money. If you failed to spend your allotted funding, you risk losing it in the next budget. You would certainly not be recognized for being efficient. Also in this chapter, he lists 4 broad areas of expertise to build financial IQ. These include accounting, investing, understanding markets, and law. Regarding accounting, quote, the more money you are responsible for, the more accuracy is required, or the house comes tumbling down, end quote. I immediately thought of FTX when I read this. Not only was fraud involved, but they were extremely messy in their accounting. Regarding understanding markets, he stresses the importance of understanding supply and demand and to constantly assess the world around you. Finally, law is important for both tax purposes and liability purposes. Both can cause major headaches to a business. Next up, Chapter 6, Lesson Number 5, The Rich Invent Money. Quote, the poor and the middle class work for money, he would say. The rich make money. The more real you think money is, the harder you will work for it. If you can grasp the idea that money is not real, you will grow rich faster. What is it? Was a question Mike and I often came back with. What is money if it is not real? What we agree it is, was all Rich Dad would say. This makes me think of the Marxist definition of value or labor theory of value. It's all based on strength and time worked. That is totally wrong. It's if you think that way, civilization would just be brutish and cold and miserable and just, it's not good. The most valuable innovations and technologies are those of the mind. The engineers and scientists that discover new machines or medical technologies are the true innovators and create an extremely large amount of value. What can be achieved by brute force does not hold a candle to what can be achieved by the human mind. Kiyosaki says, quote, the single most powerful asset we all have is our mind. So why develop your financial genius? I would like to be a part of this unprecedented evolution of humanity, the era where humans work purely with their minds and not with their bodies. Kiyosaki then goes into some strategies he has used to make money. He specifies that these investment examples are not advice for people to follow blindly, but he gives these reasons for including the examples. He wants to inspire people to learn more, to let people know it is easy if the foundation is strong, to show that anyone can achieve great wealth, to show that there are millions of ways to achieve your goals, and to show that it is not rocket science. He also says that, quote, if the opportunity is too complex and I do not understand the investment, I don't do it. One example he talks about to build wealth is buying foreclosed houses and reselling them using a 1031 exchange. He did this in Portland, Oregon with very little money down and got a good deal on a house below listing price. A year later, the house had appreciated and he used a 1031 to sell the house, delaying the tax burden, and bought a new investment property, using the profits as a down payment. He continued to do this every year until he eventually bought a 30-unit apartment, cash flowing approximately $5,000 a month. And this all started from that initial $5,000 investment. His second example is how he likes to invest in early stage companies. He does say how this can be risky, but he believes his financial intelligence adequately prepares him to make informed decisions. Quote, of course, there's always risk. It is financial intelligence that improves the odds, end quote. He writes a little more about his personal investing strategy. Quote, "My personal basis is real estate. I love real estate because it's stable and slow moving. I keep the base solid. The cash flow is fairly steady and, if properly managed, has a good chance of increasing in value." End quote. Kiyosaki also talks about how losing is part of the investing game. Being able to cope with the losses is key. He ends the chapter by describing 3 skills to help be a professional investor. 1, how to find opportunities that everyone else has missed. 2, how to raise money. 3, how to organize smart people. He goes into more detail about why these are important, but I'll leave that for you to read in the book. And we'll go on to chapter 7, lesson number 6. Work to learn, don't work for money. Kiyosaki tells a story about a time he met with a journalist in Singapore for a story. The journalist was an excellent writer and liked to write fiction books in addition to her job as for a newspaper. But her fiction books were not making any impact. And Kiyosaki recommended that she take a course on sales in order to make her a better salesperson and possibly sell more books. The journalist was offended at such a recommendation, saying that salespeople are slimy and she doesn't need to stoop that low. She thought she could rely on her writing alone. Kiyosaki writes, "The sad truth is, great talent is not enough. I am constantly shocked at how little talented people earn." End quote. Because of this, he highly values learning a little bit about a lot over specialization. He writes, "Job security meant everything to my educated dad. Learning meant everything to my rich dad." Because of this, Kiyosaki got a job with Standard Oil as a third mate on its oil tanker fleet to learn about international trade. He then went into the Marine Corps to gain leadership experience. After the Marines, he took a job at Xerox to learn about sales. He worked in order to learn, not to earn money. In this chapter, Kiyosaki lists 3 management skills he believes are needed for success. First, management of cash flow. Second, management of systems, including yourself and time with family. Third, management of people. He states the most important specialized skills are sales and understanding marketing. These skills are difficult to master because people's fear of rejection. Sales and marketing come with a lot of rejection, and you have to be able to cope with it, move on, and continue forward. Chapter 8, Overcoming Obstacles. One of my big takeaways from this chapter is when Robert lists the 5 main reasons why financially illiterate One of my big takeaways from this chapter is when Robert lists the 5 main reasons why financially literate people may still not develop abundant asset columns. These include fear, cynicism, laziness, bad habits, and arrogance. Regarding fear, he talks about how his rich dad loved the story of Texas and the Alamo. Quote, "Texans don't bury their failures. They get inspired by them." End quote. He talks about how there is a difference between hating to lose, which can be healthy, and being afraid to lose, which is crippling. Quote, "Playing it safe and going balanced on your investment portfolio is not the way successful investors play the game. If you have little money and you want to be rich, you must first be focused, not balanced." End quote. Regarding cynicism, he talks about how there are a bunch of chicken littles in the world. They're always worried about the sky is going to fall, and they use that as an excuse not to take any action. Regarding laziness, people get in the trap of staying busy. Prioritizing is important. Also, the "I can't afford it" versus the "how could I afford it" mindset falls into this category. Regarding habits, many people pay their bills first and never have any left over to pay themselves. Pay yourself first. Put pressure on yourself to make enough money to pay the bills. Outside pressure is much stronger than the pressure from within. Regarding arrogance, people think that they know more than they actually do. When you know you are ignorant in a subject, start educating yourself by finding an expert in the field or book on the subject. Chapter 9, Getting Started. Kiyosaki believes each person has a financial genius within. However, it lies asleep in large part because people are taught that the love of money is the root of all evil. This reminds me of Francisco's money speech from Atlas Shrugged, the novel written by Ayn Rand. In this speech, Francisco says, "To love a thing is to know and love its nature. To love money is to know and love the fact that money is the creation of the best power within you, and your passkey to trade your effort for the effort of the best among men. End quote. Kiyosaki again talks about how people are encouraged to learn a profession so they can work for money, but are never taught how to have money work for them. He writes, "It taught us not to worry about our financial future. Our company or the government would take care of us when our working days are over. However, it is our children educated in the same school system who will end up paying for it. And when we run short, we can always borrow more." End quote. This is how things have been, and it is unsustainable. We cannot keep kicking the debt can down the road. It greatly contributes to inflation, and the people around the world will realize how unjust it is for America to just continue to partake in QE infinity. He ends the chapter by describing 10 steps to develop your financial genius. 1. I need a reason greater than reality. The reality will be difficult and it requires work. You must have a why in mind so that the daily grind is worth it. The way Kiyosaki describes his why is by listing out his wants and his do not wants. For example, he does not want to work all his life. He does not want job security and a house in the suburbs. He does not want to be an employee. He does not want to miss his kids' football games. He wants to be free to travel the world. He wants control over his time and life. He wants to have money work for him. Finding your why is important. Number 2, second step to develop your financial genius is to choose daily. By this, he means make the choice to invest first in education, make the choice to learn from people doing what you want to do, and make the choice to listen more than you talk. Number 3, third step to develop your financial genius is to choose friends carefully. You can learn about both what to do and what not to do from friends. Also says to keep your mind open, and quote, "I would say that one of the hardest things about wealth building is to be true to yourself and be willing to not go along with the crowd." End quote. Talks about patience and finding deals early and not jumping on the bandwagon late. Quote, "There's always another wave. People who hurry and catch a wave late usually are the ones who wipe out." Finally, he says that money is made on information. All trading can be considered insider trading, but you're trying to learn something that other people don't know or overlook. Just don't do the illegal insider trading, which I think that's it's a gray area. I don't know if they're like, how do you decide what's insider trading and what's not insider trading? I think that's something that needs to be looked at more. Fourth step to develop your financial genius is to master a formula and then learn a new one. He believes you become what you study, so you should choose what you study carefully, and many times is not what you know, but rather how fast you learn, because the world changes so quickly. Fifth step is to pay yourself first. Like he said before, it creates that personal self-discipline and lets that outside pressure inspire you to start making more money. Quote, "Rule number 1 in paying yourself first is don't get into debt in the first place." End quote. So that helps a lot as well, is not have those monthly payments in the first place that are more than they would be if you weren't in debt. All right, sixth step is to pay your brokers well. A broker is your eyes and ears to the market. Seventh step is to be an Indian giver. So he kind of goes into his story about the Indians and the American settlers and giving blankets and misunderstanding, and it's kind of confusing, but you can read that when you get the book. But what he means by this is to look at more than ROI. Look for assets you get for free once you get your money back. So that's almost like an infinite ROI. And then eighth step is to have assets buy luxuries. Have a creation mindset over a borrowing mindset. Make a source of cash flow that is not your just income of work, but cash flow to cover those luxuries you want to buy. Number 9 is the need for heroes. Having people you look up to is more than just inspiration. They make things look easy. They make you think, if they can do it, so can I. Just think back to Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. Once he did it, a bunch of people soon followed. So having heroes can be greatly beneficial. Finally, number 10 is teach and you shall receive. Robert's rich dad valued charitable giving. He would say, if you want something, you first need to give. Robert says the same is true for money, a smile, love, and friendship. While I find this to be somewhat mystical, I do think there is value in giving with no expected return. Maybe you want to show people what you are capable of. An unpaid internship is a great example of this. Also, maybe there are organizations or things you greatly value, and it is in your best interest to support them financially. I prefer a charitable society over a welfare society any day, but I would also push for selfish giving. Not in the sense of expecting anything in return, but purposeful giving that aligns with your values. And then last chapter is chapter 10, titled Still Want More? ? Here are some to-dos. All right, so stop doing what you're doing. Assess what is working and what is not working, and stop doing things that don't work. Another thing is look for new ideas. Robert likes to go to bookstores and read how-to books on formula he knows nothing about. Also, take action. Find someone who has done what you want to do and talk to them. Take classes on things you're interested in. Regarding real estate, make lots of offers. Be comfortable with rejection and know that one day a sweet deal will land. Jog, walk, or drive a certain area once a month for 10 minutes. This will get you familiar with that area for possible deals. Keep an eye out for sale signs and look for indications that may show the neighborhood getting better or worse. In today's world, I'd recommend driving for Uber in a city you're interested in as well. It's a great way to see popular areas while also getting a little paycheck. Regarding investing, he likes Peter Lynch's book, Beating the Street. This was influential in his formula for selecting stocks that grow in value. Regarding purchasing things or deals, retailers love giving volume discounts. Find partners that have similar interest and group together to save money. And then finally, he has action always beats inaction. You got to do. Can't just sit. And that concludes my overview of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think it's a book everyone should read, even if they do not want to be an entrepreneur. It took me just over a week of dedicated reading to get through it and taking lots of notes. I hope you enjoyed the book review. So this one I did a little differently than previous ones. This one I actually wrote down. I typed up a review and just read it. So I think I prefer that for these denser books, and I have like a lot of talking points. It helps. I make sure I cover all the talking points. I think ideally I would have another person to kind of rally kind of these points across and have more of a conversation. But let me know what you think, or if you have any recommendations. I'll probably continue this format for dense books that I have a lot I want to cover. All right, guys. Well, have a great week. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Mike White Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mike White Pod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Y'all have a great day.